welcome everybody to the Mind Podcast. Excited to be joined here for our inaugural first time out with Greg Laemmle, who I've known for, I'm going to date us here, Greg, I think 25-ish years. I had the pleasure I had the pleasure of working with you when I got to AFI Fest in 97, and we did the festival at the Monica, my favorite theater here in Los Angeles. So Greg is the head of Laemmle Theaters, and I'm going to let him share a little bit more of his background with you all, and then we'll jump into the conversation. Thanks for joining us, Greg.
Good to be here. Laemmle Theaters was started by my grandfather and his brother way back in 1938 when they took over the operation of two theaters here in Los Angeles. We've over time morphed into being certainly the longest standing art house operation in the city of Los Angeles, currently operating 8 locations across the county.
Wow. Yeah, it's really amazing what you've done here in LA. And as you know, I've been working in the film festival space for many years and consulted to filmmakers, and it's, the Laemmle name comes up in almost every conversation when they talk about, bringing their movies out, especially in Los Angeles. Before we dive in here, I thought it might be interesting just to talk a little bit about kind of the history, just a snapshot, so that our listeners and viewers understand. We're trying to really cover the idea of the theatrical marketplace, but we also want to zero in on how it affects the independent filmmaker, right? Because I don't really think we need to spend too much time talking about how great, Star Wars and Marvel is doing for theaters and of course Top Gun. But I just thought it was interesting because a lot of people don't know this, that back in the 20s and 30s, people were going to the movies, more than once a week, right? And then at some point, TV came around, and there were a lot of other problems. You had wars, and things got a little nutty, and people wanted to stay home, and so the box office dropped in more than half. And then of course we had the 70s. I was thinking about this, Greg. I don't know if you remember, but Peter Biskind, Easy Riders and Raging Bulls, right? The 70s was a great time for independent cinema. And I had him, when he did that book, come and do a book signing in your lot at the Monica Theater when back when there was a Borders Books and Music. We hosted in your lot. We hosted
when there were bookstores.
Yeah, when there were bookstores. So the 70s was an amazing time. And then, it went down to, people go to the movies once every couple months, and then the streaming universe changed everything, and then of course we had COVID. So I don't need to wax on about the history, but I just thought it was interesting to understand that for a time, going to the movies was a really big thing, and it's become more and more challenging. And I would just love to hear your thinking about less about the history and more about kind of where things are going, in your opinion.
I have no idea where things are going. I'm a true believer in William Goldman's statement that no one knows anything in Hollywood. But, if past is prelude, we have seen this before. And in fact, our family business side, Laemmle Theaters, grew from those 2 theaters in 1938 to 6 theaters during World War II and immediately after that. And then by the early 50s, we were down to 1 screen.
Wow.
Because of those changes in moviegoing that were brought on by the new technology of television. Since then, yes, moviegoing increased again, quite dramatically during the 60s and into the 70s. But then you start dealing with challenges first from cable, then from VHS, then from DVD, and so on and so forth. So, people have long been predicting the demise of movie theaters, and yet we're still here. But, we're not unimpacted by some of these technological changes. And I think, this most recent change with the rise of streaming, which was aided, coincidentally by the pandemic closing down movie theaters, we're going to we're going to see some shakeout from that, and I think where we'll be, in 5 years, I don't know, but it's going to take kind of that long for things to settle themselves out. There are people who discovered streaming because they were forced to,
right?
And getting them back into their habit of movie going is going to take some time.
Yeah, people kind of got used to it.
People will return to movie going because it's a better experience, ultimately, and something that strikes a chord very deep within the human soul. But it does go through these stages.
Tell us a little bit about kind of how you evolved when this whole virtual thing started happening. I feel like, was it Kino Marquee that was created this? I mean, I know I want to hear more about Laemmle's virtual cinema, which I talk about all the time, but I want to hear you talk about it. But the idea that you could literally see a movie through Kino Marquee, and I could pick the Laemmle chain as collecting a piece of that ticket, if you will. I thought that was pretty innovative.
Yes, it was great. I mean, first it evolved very quickly. It was Kino, it was Film Movement, it was Magnolia. So there were a number of companies that were supportive of that at the very beginning, most of whom already had, their own, TVOD platforms. Mm-hmm. What they didn't have is, the connection with the art house customer in each market, and that was historically provided by the exhibitor. And that relationship, between distributor, exhibitor, and patron, could we replicate that in an environment where the movie theater was closed? And so obviously they, in exchange for a piece of the action, we, were directing people, where they could see movies. It was a small amount of revenue, but it was also a way to stay in touch with our patrons, not just about please help us, but hey, there's still great movies to see.
Right. And then virtual cinema is, even though obviously you've got your theaters, virtual cinema is still a thing for you, right? Tell us a little bit more about that.
We've kept the platform going, in part during the early days of the reopening, because we knew that there was still going to be some, lingering, health concerns on the part of some patrons who weren't ready to come back into the movie theater. Frankly, we're in the process probably of winding down our virtual platform. That doesn't mean we're ending it for good, but it's certainly something we're going to put on the sidelines for a while, because I think it creates a degree of confusion about, where people can see these movies. We want them really back in the movie theaters at this point. And I think it's not that everybody is comfortable sitting in a movie theater, but I think there's ample enough evidence at this point to show that moviegoing can be enjoyed safely. And it's not, a grave risk to your health. There are things that people can do to, increase their safe enjoyment of moviegoing. Mm-hmm. And, it's time to come back.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tom Cruise, right? and Downton Abbey, showing that there's still an older audience willing to come back. What about,
Sure.
Tell us a little bit more about MovieGo. You mentioned earlier, and I want to track that. What else? What other initiatives is Laemmle working on? You started to say something earlier. Was it called MovieGo?
Oh yes, when we were talking, yes. So I mean, one thing that people often bring up is this whole idea of subscriptions. Why can't movie theaters offer subscription attendance? Why, I don't want to pay per ticket or things like that.
Like MoviePass was trying.
Yes, like MoviePass was. And I mean, look, MoviePass, like streaming services, can work because they exist in an environment where they're sort of free from an economic reality. In the case of MoviePass, that resulted in bankruptcy. In the case of Netflix, it's led to an ever increasing stock price has allowed them to operate somewhat for years free of the need to actually make a profit. But I mean, the reality is we don't own any of the films we show. We license the films from distributors or or producers directly, and generally on some kind of split of the box office, but it's based on the assumption that we are going to sell tickets to each individual that sits in the movie, and that, the distributor / producer can rely on, on that, and that we're not letting people in for free, or we're not letting people in for a significantly reduced ticket amount, based on some subscription,
So what does the economics
system.
of that look like? Let's the subscription idea for Laemmle.
Well, I don't think there is necessarily a subscription idea from Laemmle. The economies of scale just aren't quite there. But when we're working with, MoviePass is talking about coming back.
Right.
That was announced at CinemaCon and elsewhere, but with some tiered pricing structures, with the understanding that the service would be buying tickets to the movies, but perhaps at a reduced rate, and that there would be some limit so that heavy users would not be seeing 7 movies a week, but there would be some number after which they would have to pay for each individual movie.
Right.
So I think that's a more sustainable economic model.
Is that what Regal Cinemark is
that.
doing? Isn't that what Cinemark and AMC are doing? Different tiers?
I do not know what Cinemark and AMC are doing.
I think they have tiers where, you pay a certain amount and, comes with discounts on popcorn and tickets and all that.
We accomplish the same thing by giving people discounts. If you buy, tickets in bulk as vouchers, you can just hand them in, and it basically gets it down to $7 a movie in many cases. Or if you have a Premier card, which, is just something that you preload with a certain amount of money, you can immediately start seeing, $2 to $3 off your ticket. And discounts at the concessions. I think, all of this is somewhat based on the idea that there is an economic decision that people make when they see a movie. Is it worth seeing? Do I want to see this in a movie theater? Or am I going to wait to see it for free, somewhere down the line, however far that may be? We want to encourage moviegoing. So, moviegoing should not be, expensive. And we try to do that, by maintaining our top prices, at a somewhat reasonable level, and certainly having, again, plenty of discount opportunities for people that want to see lots of movies. So we have, the discussion of MoviePass coming back, and we'll be, a participant in that program. Coming up on June 17th, we are starting with Mubi. On their MovieGo subscription program, where they'll be picking a film a week, and people who subscribe to that service can use it to see a movie at a movie theater, at a participating movies theater, I should say, if they're going to that specific film.
And so how does that work for you as a theater operator? Is Mubi paying you?
Well, they're buying the ticket. They're buying the tickets.
They're buying the tickets. So like the MoviePass.
Not the consumer, but right through the pass. So we're maintaining the relationship that we have with the content, right? With the film via the producer or distributor, that it's still a transactional business, and a ticket is being purchased, and then there will be a split of that revenue based on whatever agreement we have in place. But for the consumer, it's a subscription model.
Got it. Okay, well, that's good. Yeah. So you're earning what you need to earn, and Mubi's paying for it, and it'll come back to them via their subscription service, which is...
It'll come back to them through their subscription service for MoviePass. It'll come back through the subscription. They're going to sell all your personal data. There's no free lunch.
Right.
But, if you want to see movies and you don't want to think about it, every time that you're going to see the movie, what is the transactional cost of this? It's a way for consumers to get to see more movies.
Right. So let's
and I'm certainly in favor of that.
Right, of course. More cheeks and seats, right? I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And buying more popcorn and more soda, and now beer, right? It's nice I can go to your theaters and grab a beer now.
Well, look, I mean, I think there's also, there's an interesting phenomenon that we did see when, during that movie, that short period when MoviePass was around, and people were using it to see, they were being more experimental. I think they were checking out art films, and they were coming to see repertory programs. Mm-hmm. So,
well, I think that's one of the twisted side of that, Greg, is I think for all their faults, I think Netflix is in fact expanded the audience for documentary, for example, and opened the eyes of consumers that didn't really know as much about some of these titles that they just stumbled on Netflix, and they said, oh, wow. And now they own a couple theaters as well, so that'll be interesting to see where that goes. But I don't know, maybe it kind of comes back. I want to shift gears for a sec, because I know that you've been a terrific supporter of film festivals over the years. Obviously, we worked together when I was at AFI Fest, but I'm wondering what you think about the idea of film festivals almost becoming distributors in a way themselves now. I talked to a filmmaker last week. I do this film festival mastery course, and these filmmakers are saying, you know what, Jon, I want to play in 20 or 30 theaters, and it's fine with me if they're festivals, because I might not sell my movie to a distributor. And I'm just going to look at it like this was my event release, and I played a bunch of festivals, and I got to connect with audiences and get some feedback, and then I'll go to streaming platforms. And for the movies that aren't acquired by A24 and Neon and Sony, I mean, what do you think of that?
Well, I think there's some merit to it. Obviously, there's a cost to playing festivals, just as there's a cost to self-distribution. So,
yeah, well, the revenue model's a little twisted, though, because the festivals, a lot of them aren't really doing revenue shares still, and that's a whole other.
That's correct.
That's a whole other podcast. But the whole idea.
Not only are they not doing revenue share, but you actually have to pay to submit your film into the festival, and then you have to pay to get there.
Yeah, and very few of them are paying. Yeah, and few of them are paying screening fees, which again is a whole other discussion. But there is a model now for the, I would say, the top 20% of titles that are playing the better festivals now. They are earning a screening fee. I had a partner last year did over $15,000 in screening fees over the course of her festival run. So it can actually work out. Yeah, no,
certain festivals do pay screening fees, especially, ethnic festivals, more focused.
Yeah, the Jewish festivals in particular were paying her a lot of money.
Yes. So that is an opportunity to actually make a little bit of money on a quasi theatrical circuit, and I think there are other opportunities. And at the end of the day, it's also, it is a way to connect with an audience and build awareness.
Well, I just think it's interesting because we talked a little bit about it before we came on air, but the idea that filmmakers typically, I'm not going to say all of them, want to make a movie that they can see on the screen, play for audiences, right? That's why they're making it. And so they want an opportunity to do that. What they don't necessarily all understand is the economics and how the box office and the waterfall trickles down. And so forget about the big blockbusters for a minute, because it's apples and oranges. But I think the fact that, filmmakers could play with, for example, a Laemmle chain and do pretty well. What's pretty well? I mean, is it $2,000 a weekend? And if the movie's playing several times a day, yes, the advertising is a little less, but it's hard for filmmakers to really make much money in theaters, but maybe it's not all about money.
No, look, a lot of it is about, it's about building awareness, because ultimately these films do end up in some sort of ancillary world. As much as I believe from a viewer standpoint that this is how I like to see movies, this is how I'm going to best appreciate the movie, by sitting in that dark room and in the movie theater. I think also for filmmakers, they want to feel that connection with an audience. They want to be there in the room with people and hear them laughing and hear them gasping and everything, and God willing, applauding, and asking questions and having that interaction. And I think there's an opportunity for filmmakers to have that, even if their film isn't acquired by A24 or Neon or, any of a dozen other companies.
Are you guys still doing four walls? Are you still, connecting?
Yeah, we're still doing four walls. Absolutely.
Maybe talk about that a minute.
We do events.
Maybe.
So there are tons of opportunities. I mean, what does it take for a film to be considered a success in Los Angeles? I mean, over the course of a week, if you can get 500 to 1,000 people in a city the size of Los Angeles to see your movie, that's a success.
So you could four-wall theater, which, for those of you who may not know, is essentially running the four walls of the theater, paying you a fee. What would that cost an independent filmmaker? $5,000 to $10,000, for example, for a week?
We have a number of screens that are available for $5,000 for the week, with 3 or 4 shows a day. Number of seats might vary. And we turn over 100% of the box office in that kind of situation. We have some other hybrid deals there where maybe we're not turning, it's a lower advance, but we're not turning over the box office right away. Or, most efficiently, you're not screening for a full week. You're just screening for a night or two at 2 or 3 locations around the city.
Are you seeing more of that, like the tug and gather event release thing? Are you seeing that at Laemmle?
We are no longer really working with either of those groups because at the end of the day, I'm not sure what they provided.
No, but I mean the idea of an event release. You just mentioned it.
The idea of an event cinema, absolutely, yeah. We're seeing a lot of it, and it's successful.
Yeah, that's something I'm pushing a lot on our filmmaker students because I think, frankly, it makes a lot more sense for independent filmmakers to gear up their marketing towards an event release that's playing one night or 2 nights, across multiple theaters, than to have it sit there 3 or 4 times a day for a week or 2 or 3. It just makes a lot more sense.
I mean, look, there are some contractual obligations that sometimes, require people to have that 21 screening, 3 shows a day for a week kind of situation. Are you required by guild obligations, contracts? Are you required because you have to provide an Academy qualifying run? So those are things that we see here in Los Angeles. Because there is the ancillary benefit that your film plays in Los Angeles,
right?
And an agent's going to see it, or your next producer, or whoever, which happens, But I mean, ultimately, yeah, you ask the question: why do I need these 21 screenings when, I can get everyone that I'm going to get, perhaps to see this film in 2 screenings. So why don't I just schedule those 2 screenings, and then I'm going to make them special because I'm going to be there,
mm-hmm.
or the subject of my documentary is going to join me, or some director who saw my film at a film festival and really loved it, and they want to come out and show their support for it. So we've had where star director presents some unknown filmmaker's work, but if they help promote it, tweet about it, those kinds of show up. Then people show up and make it an event, make it special.
Right. Make it interesting, make it an experience.
So, yeah. And that's, and ultimately that's, great for exhibition. These things are they are not on Friday and Saturday night. Those showtimes typically are reserved for the films, but, it's a Monday through Thursday night. And if we're filling seats on Monday and Thursday, we're thrilled.
Yeah. Yeah, you sell more popcorn and more drinks, right? Well, yeah. I just want to ask one more question.
If we're filling seats, if we're selling seats Friday and Saturday, one of the most successful independent films we were associated with is The Room, which actually played multiple week engagements at multiple theaters to empty audiences, but when it was repackaged as a midnight movie, played for years.
Right. And before I jump into my last question, did you want to talk a little bit about RRR? You were saying earlier that this movie you were bringing back did pretty well, and then it left, and you're bringing it back. Was that?
Yeah, it was one of the more successful films playing in the sort of the Southeast Asian market. This was going back into January and February, and sort of a few people wandered in who were not necessarily Telugu speakers. And just loved the film and started pitching, the producers and then pitching theaters. This film needs to be seen in a movie theater. It needs to be seen by an audience that wants to see everything everywhere all at once and wants to see the Northman.
Right.
And if we position it as something special, one night across hundreds of theaters across the country, and sort of concentrate the outreach in that fashion. And packing theaters. I mean, literally sold out shows. And
Fathom's model, right? Isn't Fathom still doing that?
What's that?
Fathom's still doing that.
Yeah, Fathom is still doing it. Yes, but you can do that without. I mean, you look. You will need a guide in many cases, whether that's an independent booker or you will need to be, really take off that filmmaker hat and put on your film salesman hat.
Right.
And it takes an investment of time, depending on how you want to do it. But it is possible. In the case of RRR, they did it, as a national sort of thing all in one night. But we have filmmakers who go from one market to the next. So I'm doing my event cinema screenings in Southern California right around, concentrated in this 2-week period because I'm going to be there. And then I'm picking up my tent and I'm moving it to Northern California. And I'll be in Berkeley on Monday night and, Santa Rosa on Tuesday night and San Francisco on Wednesday night and in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
It's great. It's coming up with a concept that allows, not only you to meet exhibition where they need you to be, but that, satisfies your needs for what's going to work.
Yeah. No, it's a great example. And the last thing I was just going to bring up, excuse me, is almost an extension of that idea, which is that there was this time, I think, where for independent filmmakers, it was a real slog to figure out how you could get into theaters and how you could make that work, right? There were too many mini majors and it was too expensive to advertise. I remember playing a movie in a theater in Santa Barbara and I had to spend like $10,000 or something to advertise it. I mean, it was crazy. So that's changed, right? But one of the things that I think is important to leave filmmakers with is just the idea that even if theaters have struggled, they've seemed to be more open to being creative now than ever before. And they're taking the calls of independent filmmakers before. It doesn't have to always come through your typical booker or a distributor. Like they're looking for ways to get people in the theater. And like you said, if filmmakers can put their salesmanship hat on and get creative and create events and almost make a case for why this makes a lot of sense, there's opportunity out there.
There is opportunity, yes. And I guess, the one comment I would make on that is if you are confronted with the request for, to handle it as a four-wall or something like that, you can't take it personally. It's not about your film. Because the exhibitor, can look at your film and judge the quality of the film. What they can't judge is your ability as a film salesperson. That's what their relationship is with the distributor. They know that the distributor is going to do certain things to sell the film because they want to be able to come back, again and again with all kinds of different films and get the play dates that they need.
Right.
When you're meeting someone for the first time, you can judge the film and you can be a fan of the film, but, you still need to know that the seats are going to get filled or that even just the bare minimum stuff that needs to happen happens. And in many cases, they will say, well, you know what, you need to pay me X for the screening, whether it's whatever the terms are, it's not coming from, I don't believe in your film, or it's not coming from a place of saying, I don't think anyone's going to show up. It's, I need you get people to show up.
Yeah, there's a little bit of there's a little bit of convince me going on there, but whether it's the filmmaker,
there is
a
little bit of convince me or prove me, or if it works, it'll be to your benefit. But and when we see those scenes in movies, whether it's My Name is Dolomite or Sweet Sweetbacks, those were real situations. I mean, when those films succeeded, they succeeded to the benefit of the filmmaker.
Right.
And so this kind of situation goes back years and years and years.
Right. Well, that's great. Well, Well, I was just going to say, it's an honor to have you on, Greg. You've done so much for independent films over the years, and obviously we cheer you on, and we wish you and your family of theaters the very best. But I think that the moral of the story here is, yes, it's still tough, but, people want to see their movies in the theater. You've got great theaters, and filmmakers have great films and are willing to put on their salesmanship hat. There is opportunity.
Yeah, there is indeed.
Wonderful. All right, any final words from you before we say goodbye?
No, just thank you, and yeah, keep spreading the gospel.
All right, Greg. You take care. Thanks so much for your time today. Best of luck to
Okay,
Laemmle.
take care, John.
All right, be
Good
well.
seeing you.
Bye-bye. You too.